Hello, I am Sean Patrick, and with me today is an effigy of one of my spirit guides. Let's call him Barnaby. And I wanted to talk about how to loosely structure a tarot reading. It might seem like a silly method, but it's my method, and it kind of works for me. And I call it TDTD. T as in Tom, D as in David. And the first T stands for tea and cookies. When I do readings, I keep chocolates with me. I give chocolates to my clients when they sit down or after the reading. The idea with tea and cookies is to create a relaxing atmosphere. I had a teacher years ago, and whenever I would go over to his house and we would get into some serious esoteric work, there was always tea and scones, which is like a sweet biscuit. And we would sit and we'd have scones and drink tea, and it created a very relaxing atmosphere. And that, to me, that's the first step when doing a reading, is to create a relaxing atmosphere, to make sure the client is comfortable, and to help them relax. Especially if they're coming to a reading, they might have some anxieties about things going on in their life. But if you could get the client to just relax, I think it's easier to read them. And the reading really begins as soon as the client walks through the door. Right away, you should be asking your intuition questions and trying to plug in and begin the reading. So that's when the reading begins, with tea and cookies. And there's something about the idea of just sitting around having tea, having coffee, and just creating a relaxing atmosphere. So that's tea and cookies. That's the first step of how I do a reading. And then the first D, which is a disclaimer. And disclaimer is kind of a big one. With the disclaimer, it's letting the client know what you do and what you don't do. It's letting the client know what they could expect from a tarot reading. My disclaimer is pretty much the same every time. I let the client know that I am fallible. And if anything comes through the reading that is accurate or beneficial or informative, then credit goes to God. It goes to spirit. It goes to the universe, higher consciousness, whatever it is you wish to call it. And if there's any mistakes that come through, I take responsibility, because I have the ability to be wrong and I have the ability to misinterpret. That's pretty much my disclaimer, and it immediately takes pressure off me, and it helps me get out of my own way so I could do the reading, so I could get into a state of flow. There's other disclaimers that might come up through the course of a reading. There's what you would call the 3 Ds: death, divorce, and disease. And these things they're going to come up in tarot readings. But you have to tread lightly, I would say. With death, we don't predict death, and cards don't predict death. Psychic, being like a psychic medium, that's their specialty. And that's not anything I do on command. So you got to tread lightly with death. And it's definitely going to come up in a reading. That's a thing with a good portion of the clients who come to you because they lost someone or they're grieving. But like I said, I don't work as a medium. If you do, great. That's not my specialty. So you always want to be mindful when dealing with death. Disease, well, just like in my Reiki practice or my Darshan practice, I let people know that I'm not a doctor. I do not diagnose. I do not prescribe. And if you have medical conditions, you first and foremost, you need to see a doctor. I can't determine anyone's health by flipping cards. We could talk about it, but again, that's something you want to be mindful about. And then divorce. Divorce is always, that's another one that's going to come up a lot with clients. You're going to get people going through a divorce. And the best advice I heard is if you have someone coming in and they want to know about their spouse or infidelity or any of these things, you have to do that reading is if both people are there. So divorce is going to come up, and that's another one you're going to have to be mindful about. As a tarot reader, you don't give legal advice. That's for lawyers. As a matter of fact, as a reader, you don't do emergencies. Emergencies are for the police, they're for the fire department, and for the hospitals. I've seen and experienced people who they need the emergency reading. How soon can you read me? I need you to read me, this Monday. I'm sorry, I don't work like that. I have my days that I read, and that's when I read. The rest of the days I don't read. For me, it's Friday and Saturdays. So we don't do emergencies, not when you're a tarot reader. But that's the first D, disclaimer, and I think disclaimer is kind of an important thing to have when you do readings, and you should be using one, in my opinion, just to let the client know what it is you do and don't do. And sometimes in the middle of the reading, you might have to have some kind of disclaimer. And so those are the first steps. Tea and cookies, which is just creating a relaxing environment, making sure the client is comfortable, and then giving your disclaimer and letting the client know what it is you do and don't do. Then comes the second T, and that's tuning in. However you do that. For me, I breathe. I'll close my eyes, I'll take a few breaths, I'll say a silent prayer. Whatever it is you have to do to tune into spirit, to tune into your intuition, to tune into the energy of the client, whatever. You want to take a moment to compose yourself, is what tuning in is really about, in helping yourself go deeper into a relaxed state. So that's tuning in. That's the second T. And then comes the second D, which is divination. For me, it's tarot. For others, it might be palm readings or astrology or numerology, whatever method you use. So that's the last D, is divination. And at this point, you're getting into the reading. And that's it. That's how I loosely structure a reading. TD, tea and cookies, disclaimer, tuning in, and then divination. And I should probably add to that flow, going into the flow state, because that's what I do when I throw down cards. It's almost like whose line is it anyway? The card gives me signals, and it's like word association, and I just try to go into a flow state and just go with the reading. You don't want to edit. I try not to censor. Even if things don't make sense to me, I go ahead and I state them anyway. If they don't make sense to the client, I have them write them down. And you just want to go into a flow state, and just do your best to get out of your own way. And you could probably find a lot of things online about getting into the flow state. Another thing I do, and this is just how I do it, this is me personally. It's not something you have to do, but I really don't want to know any questions up front. I just want to start reading and go into that state of flow. And about halfway through reading the cards, I'll then look to see if I get some type of acknowledgement to make sure I'm on the right course. I want to ask if this resonates. Yes, can you make sense of this? Is this resonating with you? And I think that's important too. At some point, you want to get validation. I know a lot of very good readers. They ask the questions up front, like, "Hey, what's going on? You know, what's your question?" And that's great. It's a great way to read. But my personal flavor is just to go into the flow state, and that's my method. Thank you so much.